This is going to be an attempt at a series that I'm playing around with the idea of called the Cursed Chronicles. Essentially, those hunting shows that you'll see where, the guys kind of recapping what all went down and going through pictures, trail cam pictures. We're essentially going to try to do that with catfishing because, unfortunately, not all the catches that I do, I catch them on camera, and that's just the sad part about it. And the storytelling behind it's what I really have come to appreciate. For this episode of Cursed Chronicles, I'm going to tell you the story of Mo.
But somebody decided they wanted to make an appearance. So now we're trying to get him in.
Jumping right into the story of Mo, for those of you who don't know, I actually got my start in the content creator world, whatever you want to refer to it as. I started making videos publicly on the platform TikTok. That's actually where I started putting a lot of my time and effort, and I gained a pretty decent following over there. Unfortunately, though, not all content creators are, kind of accepted over there. In fact, there's a little bit of, I don't know if you would call it working the system or what you would call it, but long story short, I got to a point where the content and the time that I was putting into developing the content, it just didn't make any sense to keep pursuing that actively. So I made the transition over here to YouTube. And I actually really enjoy the YouTube stuff way more than I ever did TikTok, because with TikTok, the only thing that you could really do is either make a viral video or go live. And the whole going live thing can really mess up your mental state, especially if you're gauging your success off of how many people you can hold. And yeah, there was a point where I could hold a few hundred at a time, but that came and went, and there was no consistency to it. When we first got started over there, and I say we, but it's just me, I was fishing from the bank and I was going live on a regular basis. Now, when it came to the kayak, I have always kayak catfished. In fact, I've done it for several years. My first kayak that I ever did it out of was a kayak from Field & Stream, and it was called an Eagle Talon. And that was a sit-on-top kayak. You couldn't stand on it, and the seat in it absolutely sucked. But I made do with what I could. Now, even though I was only going live on the bank, I was still kayak catfishing. I just didn't know how I could, stream that without putting my phone at risk, because my kayak was my current kayak at the time was a Field & Stream Shadowcaster 123. And so that's a 12.5 standing kayak, really stable kayak. And it earned its nickname as the Battle Yak because it looked like a battleship compared to most other kayaks you would see. That thing was an absolute unit. And so at some point, I found a way to actually go ahead and mount my phone to the front of the boat. And then I actually would run a streaming phone, which was an older phone. And, one that if it fell in the water, at least I'm not out my actual phone. So we did that, and I would use my personal hotspot to make sure that I could go live and stream, and I would read the comments from my phone in my lap. Now, I only started doing that after I figured out I could. In the beginning, I just had it, I had the phone mounted like right in front of me, and all you could see was pretty much from a crotch up view. Not very appealing. Anywho, so what I started doing was I started going live in the kayak, and I was catching fish because I've always done better in the kayak than I ever did on the bank. And then there was a night where I was streaming, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So what I used to do is I would launch my kayak from the ramp. I would paddle upstream, and then I would do what they call, it's almost like spider webbing. or I just called it suspend drifting, but I had 4 rods that were suspended out from the yak at 4 different angles. And so all I would do is I would paddle upriver, I would stop paddling over where I wanted to, well, stop, and then I let the river tell me what to do from there. I literally just sat there and let the river push me whichever way it wanted to. And I was always successful with that. So that always seemed to really work for me. Now, there was one evening where we were actually doing a stream, and I had a friend of mine that goes by FIFO fishing. And FIFO used to be the guy who would come in and read the comments to me, so that way I didn't have to worry about looking at a phone. I could just focus on fishing. I also used to consider FIFO my good luck charm, because almost any time that he was in my live, I was going to catch a fish. It might not have always been a big one, but I was always going to typically have a pretty good night. Now, this is the really cool part, and so I'll actually pull this up here so that you guys can start to see it. One night when I was streaming with FIFO, I caught a pretty decent flathead. I was actually anchored up right next to a barge silo, and maybe 10 feet of water, and I caught a pretty good flathead. And that was a pretty decent night, but I let the river tell me what to do from that point on, and I did my suspend drifting back down towards the boat dock. Well, towards the end of the night, we're not really getting any bites, and I decided that, maybe it's time to just go ahead and end the stream, save my phone battery, because that's one thing about live streaming, it kills a phone battery. So I cut the camera off, long story short. After I cut the camera off, I actually reeled in my lines, or at least I thought I did. Apparently I had left the 2 that were in the back still in the water, and I was paddling back towards the boat launch. As I'm paddling back towards the boat launch, I suddenly realized I'm not going forward anymore. And so, I was like, okay, I'm probably hung. And I turned back, and instead of seeing, a rod bowed and just staying bowed, no, I see a rod bowed that is thumping and bouncing. And then all of a sudden I realized once I stopped paddling, I'm actually getting pulled backwards.
I mean, big bluegill. Big blue.
I mean, this was insane to me. I'd never experienced anything quite like this. I mean, I'd caught 20s and some 30s in my kayak. Those were considered bigger fish. But this was different. And so I without even thinking about it at first, because I have this fish hooked. This fish has hooked himself perfect. I go ahead and I turn my camera back on my phone. I go live again, and I'm hoping, I'm sending text to FIFO, I'm sending text to whoever. I say, I need a moderator in here because I'm going to need a screenshot. No one's going to believe this is happening. I'm terrified. My phone is going to die. And so I can't get anybody in there as I'm fighting the fish, but I'm live fighting the fish, and it's at this terrible camera angle because, again, I didn't have a really good setup at the time. And you can see somewhat see what's happening because you can hear me reeling, you hear the water splashing, you see the boat rocking back and forth. And keep in mind, this is a 10 foot, well, 12 and a half, sorry. I always joke around, I call them 10 foot bath toys. But this is a 12 and a half foot kayak in the middle of the river with some behemoth of a catfish on here. And this is, hands down, this was one of the most exciting things that I had ever experienced in my life. But I fight him until I get him up and I see him for the first time. When I see him for the first time, it's a combination between joy, excitement, panic, anxiety, and all of these emotions because he's massive. He's huge. He's bigger than anything I've ever caught before in my life. And so I'm sitting back thinking, I don't have a net. I don't have grippers. All I have are my hands. And I got to get that big boy in this boat.
I mean, big bluegill. Big blue. I don't even know how I'm going to get him. Come here. Come here. Oh, God. Oh. He's going to flip the boat. He's going to flip the damn boat.
And so the fight continues. I do get him up to the boat, and I actually had to, this was the first time I started doing this, but I had to actually really center myself to make sure that I didn't flip the boat when I got him up there. So I take both hands, I grab him by his jaw, and without my lower body moving, just my upper body, I pull him up. And with him in the kayak in the deck, his head sitting in my lap and his tail is still a solid, I don't know, a foot, maybe something like that, over the front of the kayak. And this is a huge blue, biggest blue of my life. I'm super excited.
Guys, I don't know if you can see this. This is a stud.
Excited. And now the only thing going through my mind now is I gotta get back to the launch. I have to get a weight on this fish.
I gotta get to the bank. I gotta get to the bank. I mean, this is a stud, guys. Ugh.
Fun fact too, for anyone who's unaware, so the West Virginia state record blue cat has been broken a couple times. In fact, one year it was broke by a buddy of mine named Cody Carver, and then literally it seemed like almost the next year, I think it was actually January the following year, it was broke again. And now I'm talking weight. It's currently, if my math is right, and I'm pretty sure it is, to break the state record here in West Virginia, it would have to be a 70-pound blue. And at the time, it wasn't quite that. In fact, I can't remember what it was, but Cody Carver's record, I'll put it somewhere here in this because, again, a buddy of mine smoked the record, and he's an awesome dude. So, but it's not that I thought that I had the state record, but I just wanted to know for myself. And so finally, it's time to start worrying about getting back to the boat launch. Keep in mind, there's no trolling motor on this kayak. There's nothing but my paddle and my willpower, and this fish has drugged me back up river a solid 200 yards, maybe 150 if you want to be more conservative. But now I have to paddle back, and all I'm worried about the entire time this is happening is this fish's health.
Hang on, buddy. I'm trying.
Now I'm paddling back to the ramp. I finally get back to the ramp, and I'm calling anybody and everybody I can. I don't have a scale with me, and so I'm calling my buddy Kirk. I'm calling my dad, my brothers. I'm calling everybody, just saying, hey, can somebody please give me a hand? And while this isn't a state record, this was a state citation, which is like a trophy from the state. It's a pretty cool gig. But so anyway, what I did to assume, and it'll get you pretty close, there's a calculation where you can do length and girth of the fish and get you pretty close to the weight. But around this time, my phone is still live during all of this, keep in mind. One of my buddies goes by Wild Adventures. He jumps in, and I tell him, I was like, you've got to see this fish. Screenshot it for me. And so he sits in my room, or my chat box, if you will, while I get the fish out of the boat.
Come here.
I'm sure my mustache is so hard that getting down my lip.
Wild, get ready.
Oh my God.
And again, I'm just worried about setting that fish free and making sure that the fish lives to be caught again. Wild screenshots everything for me. He records it for me. And then I get a few photos of myself holding it. That fish is what sparked the idea to try and break my state's record out of kayak. Now, I want to break it regardless. But immediately after that, I couldn't afford one of the motor guide trolling motors. They're like $1,500 or something like that. So I went and I bought a cheap trolling motor from Walmart. I bought a, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a potentiometer controller is what it is. And so I wired up my speeds to be controlled right there by my seat. So I could go forward, reverse, 1 all the way to 5 or 6 or whatever the speeds were. But I could control my speed there. And then to steer it, I used to have strings tied to eyelets that were actually attached to the shaft of the trolling motor. And that would be how I would steer my kayak. So I looked like I was steering a sleigh or something. But the reality of it was I made it work. This is just one story of several that have come out of that original Battle Yak. Both of my kayaks have nicknames, Battle Yak 1 and Battle Yak 2.0. I'll do an in-depth video on how I built and rigged up each one at some point. Mo was the first big blue to ever actually come into my kayak and sparked the desire for me to find a way to break the state record with a 10-foot, 12-foot, however many foot plastic bath toy. I mean, I still just sit back and think about that fish all the time. Now, I've gotten bigger since him, but he was the first. And, you know, they say you'll always remember your first. I hope that you guys enjoyed this Curse Chronicles. We'll see how it goes. I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to stick with this or not. It really depends on how this video turns out. But I hope that you guys all got something out of this. And I hope that you like it. If you do, let me know, because I've got plenty of other stories to tell you guys that didn't make it to the camera. Either I wasn't equipped, or I just didn't have one with me when I caught them. But anything that's in the Curse Chronicles has to have some kind of a picture at minimum to make the cut. That's going to do it for today's episode. Like I said, I hope that you got something out of it. If you did, make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz. Stay bent, y'all. We'll see you on the next one.